Yes, of course. There are lots and lots of things that are helpful in analysis like this. There are some things that we have done already, or at least what we are thinking about already, but there are lots of things that we haven't thought about and surely should think about. Something that I kept thinking while listening to the presentations is that the problem is that we really don't know what's going to happen, and there are so many different scenarios. And probably we will only get to know what's going to happen in the future. So it's very hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. And this means that we need to be able to make decisions fast, to be agile in the future too, to be able to react fast. But at the same time, in liberal democracies, what allows us to make fast decisions is trust, is a coherent society, a society in which people are not polarized, in which we're able to trust our governments and put faith into what's going to happen. And at the same time, we're losing trust in our societies. We can see polarization around the world. So perhaps we should not only think and talk about, for example, how to change our skills policy, what to do with our social security systems, but also perhaps we should be talking more about the structure of our society and how we make decisions, because this perhaps is the most crucial element of being ready for the future. So this is what I thought about when I heard the presentations.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, the last point you made about how we make decisions and the sort of structures in governance society, that actually relates already our governance scenarios that we published in June, where we actually had different options, whether the decision making is fast, is it more analytical, and so on. But I would like to ask the panelists, do you have any comments on the previous presentations? Is there anything you would like to briefly discuss before I open it up to the questions from the audience, please?
I really wanted to thank you. In some sense, I think it would have been wiser if we presented our scenarios after you, because I really liked the wide context that you presented, and the strong emphasis on the change that is happening. I very often see that people are reluctant to admit it. And in Estonia, especially, I think we're very afraid of change, and we would like to keep the status quo. And then in this sense, I'm very happy that I could present the scenarios with you. And the second thing I wanted to compliment is that I like the wide context. Like, you don't talk about employment policies only, but you also mention environment, even though it doesn't run into the main analysis, it comes into play. And I think the more we can find links between different areas and have this holistic view to the society, the better.
Yeah, I would like to continue this based on these two observations, the wideness, and as you said, it's the kind of cohesion and our ability to make these decisions that is at stake now. And sometimes when we talk about the future of work, we already paint a very small picture that it's just something that happens at work, and we forget how big part of our society work has actually been. I always say that the biggest change in work that our generation will see has already happened a long time ago, and probably, actually, this is true in Estonia as well, that less than half of the people are in steady jobs because there are so many people who are pensioners, but also gig work and these types of things. And that means that what used to be our main way of contributing to society is no longer there. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, that work isn't just something that happens at work, but it's a major part of society, not just economically, but also social and cultural cohesion and our ability to work as countries.
I could also continue on this need to think more holistically and also about this, how do we make decisions? One thing that we have now in Sitra been proposing and developing is this idea of phenomena-based policies. So not kind of overcoming ministerial and other silos and looking at one phenomena together, ministries together, different stakeholders together, etc. So this is especially something that is needed now.
All right, thanks so much. So I think now it's a good time to start taking questions from the audience. So anybody, the questions, please. Anything, anybody? Yeah, there is a... why don't I give you a mic as well?
Good morning. Thanks for very interesting presentations. Alexander Stipilos from the Taltech now. So my question is related to the digital economy and data as part of the economy. And I mean, some people are now talking about people conducting labor or redefining labor, what people do with their own data. We produce immense amounts of data. And for example, Jared Lanier has been talking about how to monetize this. Have you considered this as an aspect of future of labor? Kind of trying to utilize this as a source of income?
Yeah, I think the big political battle in the future will be, yes, we have, but first, I'll give the short answer, and then the big, will be, how do we see data? Do we see it as capital, something that you own and you can monetize and you trade with? Do we see it as infrastructure, something that is shared, by everyone, just such as roads or things like that? Or do we see it as labor, as something that we bring to be able to produce things? So should we have, for example, data unions or things like that? I am personally a bit hesitant on the idea that, or on the ideas of my data and I own my data and then I can trade data for two reasons. It's an atomistic and individualistic point of view. And from that actually follows the second one, that your data alone is not, it's worth not much, unless you have a very particular disease, for example, and there are examples, of course, but it's data together that is worth something. And now the big question related to that then is, of course, that who are the other platforms than Chinese and American platforms that can bring data together to create value? We don't have many, for example, European ones. There are some Russians ones, there are some Chinese and so forth, but we don't have any homegrown ones or kind of non-market ones, for example.
Please, Sten, Andreas.
I think this is also a question that interestingly ties values, law, and economy. For the reason that privacy is something that we in Europe value very much, but that is very differently understood in the US, and perhaps there is a completely different understanding in, for example, the Chinese culture. And this underlies the economic foundation of our societies too. Because if we in Europe set certain rules for the use of data, but in China they set completely different rules, it also means that our economies are going to be different. We cannot really be sure if our approach to data is the one that gives us the best outcomes in terms of economy, or perhaps if it is the best outcomes in terms of our society's building. Perhaps there are strong links to also, for example, building trust in societies. If, for example, we have strong privacy, we can also trust our government, our partners a bit more, which gives us benefits in some other areas of economy. So I think it's again a very complex problem, something that unites very different spheres, and it's very hard to understand, especially if we cannot really understand what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah,
please. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that in addition to privacy, the question for governments is also what kind of data sets or data analysis tools or should be kind of offered, should be open or offered as kind of a commons. This relates to the idea of universal basic assets and not just income. What kind of assets are needed in future in order to ensure that everybody has a kind of equal chance for work? And data might well be some data sets might well be part of these assets.
Yep. Johanna, please.
I would also like to continue on that we're still only getting to the discussions of the scenarios and what it means for the government and what can we do. But I think the data issue will come along more strongly as well. In the context of skills, for example, we see that we could do so much more if we could only use the data, or if we could find like alternative ways. But in the context of the project itself, we had a lot of discussions on what is work. And actually in the paper I mentioned by Kaire Holtz on virtual work, there are some theories that it might be considered work that you browse your social media and you create value. And I think the more we have this different value creation, alternative value creation possibilities, then at one point we have to check, does it actually mean that we do work? Yep, thanks.
Great, thanks Johanna. Questions? Yeah, Meelis back there. I'm going to bring you a mic. So.
Thank you. Matti Saaben, Minister of Finance. The Finnish colleagues mentioned that there's some polarization in the Finnish society and also at the government level. And at the same time, there is maybe not so much enthusiasm about talking about such philosophical questions as the future work at the government, and not maybe continuing the basic income experiment, if I got it right. At the same time, we know that there are several entrepreneurs in your government at the moment, and there are elections coming in Finland and Estonia soon, and lots of entrepreneurs have organized themselves in Estonia as well, in more or less political parties, and not quite yet, but still. So my question is, should we include more entrepreneurs or the private sector in those discussions? And yes, could we profit from that, or should the private sector or the entrepreneurs drive their own private economy, and some other professions be more active in discussing more philosophical matters? Thank you.
Thanks. Who wants to answer? Okay, please.
That is a very direct question. I don't know if I can give as direct answer as you would perhaps want it, but that a very good one, of course, to ponder. I guess one could say that the Finnish government has had the kind of entrepreneur's eye in looking at these things, and less of a statesman's eye, without going into saying that what's the right role for entrepreneurs. Because at the same time, for example, we have had a tremendous renewal of the transportation sector run by one entrepreneur minister. So a lot of new things have been done where entrepreneurship is the answer or can have some kind of solutions. But perhaps these more kind of governmental and governance innovations are something that this government hasn't necessarily understood. So you are perhaps right that there has been a certain kind of focus that things that entrepreneurs can solve are, of course, things that these kind of entrepreneur politicians are looking at. But I'm not going to give a recommendation of including or excluding entrepreneurs from government.
All right, thanks.
I would also like to come back to the definitions and definition of concepts. So what is an entrepreneurial mindset, and what kind of entrepreneurial mindset is now currently in government? Probably more in the kind of the traditional company mindset, and not necessarily a kind of this network entrepreneur mindset. But in general, I feel that it is good to involve as many different stakeholders as possible to the discussion of future work, and also what to do next, what are the kind of concrete actions.
All right, thanks. Questions? Okay, there is a question back there. I'm going to bring you a mic.
Hello, thank you for a very good conversation around future of work. I'm Laquan. I'm studying at MIT data economics as well as at TCU in technology governance. And I'm very interested in hearing your opinion about migration when it comes to participation. So when it comes to deciding future of work, if somebody's moving around the world for projects, what does it look like in terms of taxes or understanding the relationship between your work and your money and how you are a citizen of a country that you're moving to?
All right. Who wants to answer the question?
I will try to answer it. As I see, well, we took on the migration topic as one of the key ones. So one of the assumptions in the scenarios, if it didn't come out maybe clearly before, then it is that without the global talents, it is very, very very difficult to make the most of the potential of the technological development. But many countries have realized that. So I would say that the concept or the name of the talent war is not overemphasized. And we also had special research on types of short-term work migration. So the talent migration was one of them, but we cannot also exclude other types, which is within company migration, but also the migration of the seasonal migration, which mostly concerns low-skilled people, and then digital nomads, which is becoming more and more important. And what I have learned looking into the migration trends and policies is that it's a very, very complex world. Countries have different regulations for migration, for different types of migration. We have a quota for long-term migration, but a lot of exceptions for highly skilled people. At the same time, a separate law for short-term migration. You see, it's like a very, very complex world, very difficult to regulate, and I think it's actually good that countries have approached it from different sides, different groups. But when you ask about taxes, income, all these kinds of stuff, then it's a big problem. Where should the taxes go if I'm, for example, digital nomad, living here in Tallinn, and then working for a company in, I don't know, US? Usually people do their own company. But I have heard, so first off, we have this visa of digital nomads coming up in Estonia. I think there is a plan. And secondly, I think there has been a discussion of extending the e-residency program to take into account this potential to involve the independent employees of the global labor market. But I'm looking really forward to the what will be the solutions, because there should be one at one point.
Just about the taxes. So, for example, the president of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, has called upon the politicians and officials of Estonia to design Estonia as a harbor for digital nomads, to create a society, a social security system in which anyone from the world can register themselves in Estonia and then get pensions, healthcare, and so on. There are two problems with the concept. One of the problems is that tax is something that is regulated internationally, meaning that Estonia cannot move alone. If we would, for example, say that as a digital nomad, you can pay your taxes in Estonia and get benefits from our system, it would immediately put under question the concept of residency, that you usually have to pay your taxes where you are a resident. And even if you are a digital nomad, you're likely to have a place where you are resident. Some countries have made specific regulations how to get past it. So, for example, some US citizens have to pay their taxes to the US, even if they do not live in the United States. But probably Estonia is not big enough to overcome this international agreement. The second problem is that even if we could compete in terms of taxes with other countries, would it really be beneficial in terms of our social security systems? The problem is that our social security system is based on solidarity. That if you are someone paying to the system, you also pay for the expenses of children and the elderly. Whereas private companies do not have this kind of assumption in them, meaning that always private companies can provide better packages for these types of people. So I would say that the idea of digital nomads is a good one. It's one with potential, but at least in the environment we have right now, it's probably not too realistic.
Okay, Johanna, please.
A final remark, then looking into this potential of private companies to take over the market of providing these services of short-term social security in countries. There are some people in the world who seriously envision platform-based work, world of work, where the platforms themselves, the work they provide is not the only value for the people who are involved in these platforms. Instead, they start competing in the package they offer to the people who have decided to provide their skills through the platforms. So it would mean a huge network of cooperation with private insurance providers in different countries, but this is the idea that I heard just this spring in a small seminar on the social security provision, and there was one platform owner who said that they are already looking into ways to provide this service, this private service, to their people.
We'll take a next question then. Yeah, please, there is a question I see. I'm going to bring you a mic, so yeah.
Katre Pall, Ministry of Social Affairs, and I'd like to continue with the issue of social security, because Sten already mentioned that we have solidaric elements in the system, and this definitely applies well to health insurance. But then Johanna had a sentence in her slides saying that our social insurance is least redistributive in Europe. And then this question is, of course, to everyone in the panel. How does this, in your minds, link with this social cohesion and then trust elements as well? So if we have a very little redistributive social security, then what happens in the level of trust with the government and then also the cohesion? Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Who wants to start? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think you raised an absolutely fundamental point that we see through when we are talking about our megatrends, one of which is future work. We emphasize that now is the time to talk about the redistribution, the kind of the mechanisms for distribution of wealth. How do we ensure that if indeed we are in kind of the situation as in the 1800, that the kind of the wages won't go up even though the productivity does, then how do we ensure that we are not in 50 years in this new Engels pause thing? And this is especially a kind of very kind of political discussion. There is no one ready solution, and I feel that therefore we need these experiments. We need to continue the basic income experiment, or then some other similar type of experiments, and really to learn from them and to take action based on these experiments.
Okay. Anybody else on this question?
Yes,
Sten.
so this is what I was aiming at earlier too, that social security systems do bring about cohesion. Piketty was popular a few years ago. For some reason, he's not in fashion anymore. At least we do not talk about him as much as we did a few years earlier. But at the same time, we have to stay competitive, because the big question and global question is, who is going to become the headquarter of these platforms, and and which countries are then going to be the users of these platforms? Right now, Estonia has managed to at least become a home to one platform, the home of Taxify. The question is Taxify the lone platform in Estonia, and are we going to be on the using end, or is there a way we could become the home for the headquarters of these platforms? And of course, this is a question of balance. How much would we like to aim at security? How much would we like to aim at competitiveness? Are these two aims somehow mergeable? Are they contradictory or not?
There's also, of course, another way of kind of combating Piketty, which is that to look at what companies are doing. So since mid-90s in the Finnish data, and already earlier in the international data, you can see that companies stopped investing and stopped paying salaries of their massive income, but they started paying dividends to their owners. And this is a change. So before, they paid higher salaries, they hired more people, they invested in R&D and so forth, and now that has flattened out. So in other words, there could be a way, of course, that you could say to companies that, look now, stop paying those dividends, start investing and paying people salaries, which would be pre-distribution, I guess, rather than redistribution. But that would, of course, then include legislation into multinational companies, how they operate within national borders, which is not easy but possible.
Perhaps in addition to that, I think what is interesting is also this idea of platform cooperatives, where the users or those who work in the platform also own the platform, and then you have kind of the platform as a distributor.
Johanna, please.
I wanted to add that I also see that there is a huge role in values, in the societal values, and the information space that we share. So there are 2 points. The first thing is that talking about the changes of the future of work makes people afraid. And actually afraid even if their income currently is secure, if it's not very low, but they feel that it's not, they don't see change as desirable. And this has been one of the reasons why we talk about not only the change of work, but also the threat to the political system. And at one point, it might bring along a situation where you can put people with opposing views into the same room and they're not able to come to a common conclusion. But at the same time, so I have been thinking whether coming up with the scenarios looking into the future is a good idea or not. But I see that it is a way to raise these questions, to show the statistics that in Estonia we have some indicators where we are really lagging behind, which will be threatened in the nearest future, and at the same time to raise this competitiveness issue. We have to say out loud that if we want to get better livelihoods, then we cannot go about, restricting automation. It's all about changing business models and being competitive in a competitive world. And it's on all of us to get to do it. It's not an issue of only entrepreneurs or policymakers. So everyone has to contribute.
All right, thank you. Questions? Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, there is one question back there, Annika.
Thank you for it sounds weird. Thank you for your presentations, but it's not a question per se. It's more like comment. What Johanna said, that people are afraid of change. Isn't it a myth? In a sense that, for instance, if you think about it, within the last 3 years, how many of yours you actually acquired a new job, new hobby? Raise a hand. Is it something that you're scared of? No? It's happening already today. So that's what I'm saying is that people are not afraid of change, but ambiguity, more or less. Change is good. No question.
I think that's a
please.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And when there's ambiguity, I think making scenarios, making visions, making it clear that what is the future we want is crucial. That's the way to kind of alleviate the kind of the pain or fear of future.
Right. There is a question back here.
Yeah, I would like to carry on from the last remark. Actually, also for me, it was news that people dislike change and are afraid of it. I only got to know it when I started to work in larger organizations before, like doing something new, doing something fast, and seemed obvious and not bad at all. And when we think about it, about change, then people accept actually change quite willingly. If you think about smartphones, people have taken it in and it's cool and everything. So I would like to add to ambiguity also like this kind of forced change. If you are forced into a position where you don't want to be. And this takes me to a question which actually refers back to many of your points and Sten's initial question. So we have to make decisions about data, about artificial intelligence, about a lot of things. And you also had in your presentation the question, it's not a question about the future of work, but it's actually a question how we would like to live in the future. So for me, the most mind-boggling question is, now we have to make a really important collective decision on like this kind of contradicting and let's say completely, and nobody knows the future. So on this kind of missing information, we have to make it as at least I feel that there is the need not only to include entrepreneurs but all kinds of stakeholders. So how do you empower actually people to think about these things, to give this kind of solutions, maybe using aggregated data on opinions and everything? How do you give people the knowledge to make their own decisions also, because it is like it seems to be a fundamental change. So it's to be like included and motivated and to have actually a good decision, not like by a cluster of experts or a cluster of entrepreneurs, and to enforce this kind of social connections and meaningful connections afterwards. Do you have some ideas how to empower this kind of societal discussion? Thanks.
Thanks, Mikko. Who wants to start?
So I'd like to start by challenging one assumption that we very often make. So very often we think that revolution is going to happen in all countries at the same time. Is it really true, though? If we look back at the Industrial Revolution, for example, Industrial Revolution started in the UK roughly at 1790. In Russia, it only started in 1890, when Sergei Witte became a minister and then forcefully started investing into railways, into machinery. So there's a 100-year gap between the start of Industrial Revolution in the UK and the start of it in Russia. It was almost completed in the UK by 1850, 1860, which would then mean that Russia had 20, 30 years to think about it. If we think, is revolution in Estonia going to start before it happens, or in Finland, before it happens in any other country, is not very likely. The reason, at least in Estonia, is that salaries in Estonia are rather low, meaning that the incentive to invest into robotics is lower than it is in other countries. And also, investment into digital technologies in Estonia is one of the lowest in Europe. So it's not very likely that we are going to be at the head of the revolution, but rather we are going to be one of the slowest ones in Europe, which might sound like with something as with only bad consequences, but at the same time, it at least gives us some information, what happened in other countries. It allows us to design our policies in such ways that we can take other examples into account. And this perhaps also answers your question a bit. At least here in Estonia, this is what gives us information on what should we do.
Right. Anybody else on this question?
Yeah, I can also take on, because you said that it's forced, and why should people be worried about? I guess it's that somehow the automation and change to work has been only portrayed as a horrible thing. If you look at back Marx and Keynes, who were saying that it's going to be wonderful and we can philosophize and so forth and work for 4 days or so for in the future. None of this conversation is present. It's crazy. I mean, work. Even for me, who I love work and work far too much. There are things that I absolutely hate in my work, and I'm sure it's the same, but no one talks about liberation of these horrible tasks and these types of things. That imagine when you don't have to do these things anymore. There's no emancipatory discussion. And that's what I really, really wonder, that where is it? This emancipatory discussion, that imagine what we can do with our time or our skills, or when we have all these machines at our hand, what can we create? They might be even free for us to use. I mean, this is a heaven we're talking about, but that's missing from our discussions, and I really, really don't know why.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, coming back to your question on how to give people the kind of the knowledge and tools to make their own decisions, and I would add to really discuss what we want. A couple of concrete things we have done. We have we have a vision for Finland, but we also say that every responsible actor should make their own vision, because we need a lot of different visions and discussion about visions. In order to ensure that it is as kind of easy as possible, we made a kind of a toolkit, a future makers toolkit for making a vision. So there are many methods in futures research, etc. You can make them more and more available to people, and at the same time kind of invite people to really discuss about what do we want. We far often think about how to kind of respond to the mega trends and have this kind of a reactionary mindset, how to be more proactive and really create the future we want. Another concrete thing that was just on Wednesday, we had a kind of annual foresight seminar called FinSight, and this time it was about visions. So we had over 40 presenters presenting their vision. So it's not about the lack of visions, it's about the lack of discussion about preferred futures. And of course you can have this kind of a seminar forum to catalyze this discussion.
Great. Johanna, do you have any comments?
Yeah, to Mikko. I think there are some great initiatives that have emerged in the past 5 years in Estonia, and that the current context also has kind of given the beginning to. So, for example, the Opinion Festival is a great place that brings people actually together to try to find these common points, even if some people say that it's pointless. then we have this long-term strategy creation currently. But I think the problem with these things is that they have this self-selection bias. So people who are actually very interested in finding a common solution, they come there, and the others stay in a different room. And as per this positive vision, I think, I'm not sure whether it's like this pessimistic Nordic personality type or something, but I think our third scenario, where it's like the underemployment, it was initially this kind of like gave a chance for, you know, just figure out what you want to do. I also presented it quite optimistically today, but actually it's written down in a very negative way. And what happened was that the feedback to the scenario was that it's not realistic. It's like everyone will be miserable without jobs. I think maybe it's we love to work.
All right. There is a question actually here in the middle, and then I will come back to you in the back. So, Pri, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Kyra Holtz. I'm from the University of Hertfordshire, and we do research about virtual work, digital labor, especially with a focus on platform work. My question goes quite well with the previous question. And I address the Finnish speakers. I was missing one element in your discussion, and namely the culture of workers' resistance and collective bargaining, and its impact on how the future of work may actually look like. So in our research, we actually already began seeing that how different cultures of resistance or these kind of different systems are already shaping, you know, the direction where, you know, work is going. And for instance, platform work that has emerged in Sweden already began looking, you know, has already taken partly a different direction than platform work that has emerged in the US and the UK. And we also see differences between, not only between countries, but also we began seeing contrasting attitudes of towards collective organization between these global online workers, which is quite striking, and we haven't really started understanding and we're trying to make sense of this. Is there a discussion in Finland about the role of resistance or collective bargaining as being important in shaping the future of work? And how does Finland make sure that workers have a strong voice in this changing landscape of work? And what are the lessons that Estonia could learn from Finland, maybe? Thanks.
All right, thank you. So, Roope.
Excellent question and excellent remarks. We did recommend workers of or employees of large corporations to be given seats in the actual board of the companies, which is, I think, quite hardcore. If you look at the board composition as it is, it's been difficult to get young or female representatives to those. So that is one. In terms of the collective bargaining, I'm absolutely as thrilled, I guess, as you are, of the new forms of collective bargaining that could happen, because trade unions are clearly not the ones that are organizing the collective bargaining of the employees. And if you look at the biggest companies in the world in terms of employees, they are outsourcing companies, global outsourcing companies. So it's really becoming a kind of a box that is to be filled, that who is going to organize perhaps global collective bargaining of employees, so that they can start having a say in terms of platform companies and outsourcing and other outsourcing companies, I may add, but that's a space I'm looking at very much, but I haven't seen much, and that's totally missing from the Finnish discussion as far as I know.
You're absolutely right. As far as I know, it's also. I feel that in digitalization, in platform economy, we are kind of in the beginning, and we need to have a kind of discussion on basically how to behave, what is fair platform work. But it also is more broader question of what kind of tasks should be done, and well, basically what are the kind of the etiquette of digital economies. But yeah, that discussion is still kind of missing.
All right, thanks. So we have a last question. It was back there. So right, and then we have to wrap it up.
Thank you for another opportunity to speak. Unfortunately, the two people who were rather positive about the tolerance to change and uncertainty have already left. So I'm addressing people who are not here. I would like just to challenge this assumption, and I would like to ask everyone to be rather careful about generalizing. So people have different gender, people have different age, people have different skill sets, and those influence tolerance to change and tolerance of uncertainty. We are experiencing rising levels of anxiety and depressions across society, and just talking about people really being easy with change and changing jobs frequently, etc., is probably not exactly correct. I mean, I'm rather young, and I have changed 4 jobs in the last 4 years or 5 years. But every job comes with some stress. Every job comes with stress, and it's not always that easy to take on new challenges. So it's just a comment, and a further development of this comment is now we are living in this data world, and it allows us to develop really targeted and individualized approaches to social protection that could be targeted towards people with more needs rather than people with less needs. I mean, we are living in societies or in countries with very generalized approaches to welfare state. It's sort of horizontal, it applies to everyone. But now we can actually do more tailor-made things.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any reflections on this comment, or you have a question? Or yeah, okay.
My name is Ege Kulbak-Latik. I am working in state government office, and I agree. Thank you for this comment, of course. And when we are looking at the discussants, also we can see that young, vital people are representing.
Don't generalize.
Of course, but nevertheless, I think that human capital, or I would say people, is the most key issue in this huge change. And of course we need to take account all of us. So that's why we, in the Prime Minister's offices, we started to discuss what does it mean and how we should define the phenomenon of talent. Is everybody in a way talented? Are there different levels in the talent reflections? And I think that, yes, I agree, and the talented and reflective, critically thinking, imaginating people are the most important to take all these challenges.
Thank you so much. We will actually, did you have a brief comment, or yeah, please.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point. I just wanted to mention that it almost became one of the main uncertainties in the scenarios whether people are capable to cope with the change, because we don't know that. It's a big question.
Right, yeah, thanks so much. So, I would like to end it here because I don't want to fail as a moderator going over time. And thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks bringing up this human capital as the last point, because this is actually one of the projects we will start next year is the value of human capital, and I guess also whether people are able to adapt to the changes and what kind of changes. I would like to thank very much our guests. Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming from Finland. Thanks for coming from the Super Ministry.